Good afternoon and welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In the series on sociological thinkers, in today's lecture we are going to discuss interactionist perspective. Now let us understand what is interactionist perspective, and the focus of today's lecture is to understand the contribution of Herbert Blumer and George Herbert Mead in terms of understanding the concepts that they have used to give us a symbolic interactionist perspective. Now we know that over the years sociology has developed a myriad of theories, functional theory, structural functional theory, conflict theory, and these theories are all helping us to understand the social world. They give explanation of the social reality. Symbolic interactionism is one such theory that helps understand social reality in terms of meanings and symbols. Herbert Blumer coined the term symbolic interactionism and is credited for giving shape to this perspective. He developed the approach of Herbert Mead and gave symbolic interactionism a new direction. George Herbert Mead was the lecturer in University of Chicago, and in his lecture he was kind of giving this new idea of understanding social reality by understanding interaction and the creation of self, I and me. Now Mead did not publish any of his work, and after his death, Herbert Blumer coined this term symbolic interactionism based on the work of Herbert Mead and further strengthened the theory of interactionism. According to Herbert Blumer, symbolic interactionist perspective and method, which he wrote in 1969, he investigated a number of basic concepts or root images that further depict and describe the idea that represents symbolic interactionism. So root images is referred in terms of the key concepts of symbolic interactionism or interactionist perspective. So the 5 basic root image according to Blumer are self, object, social action, social interaction and joint action. Now let us understand each of these because these are the key concepts for understanding interactionism or interactionist perspective. So the root image refer to and depict the following matter: human group, society, social interactionism, objects, human being as actor, human action and interconnection on the line of action. So human group or society is the first root image that Blumer makes reference to, and it can be defined as being composed of human beings engaged in all the varied action which they perform as they move through life. So we know that in our everyday interaction from birth to death, we've been in millions of actions, infinity action, and therefore what society is basically the interaction between individuals and the members of society. Human action is not based on what we do as individual. Instead, it occurs at 3 levels: individual, group and society. So what we do at individual is also to an extent the result of what we have learned from the society or what the group has influenced us. So this characterization of human society existing in action is the starting point from which social interactionism views human conduct. So we are of the opinion that for interaction perspective, the starting point is social action and the end point is social action itself. So a lot of conceptual schemes that depict reality, which we think are actually original, are all derivation from social action. So some of the concepts like society, culture, which we are familiar with and thought of helping us understanding social reality are actually derivative of social action. So what is society? It is the social action of a number of individuals. And what is culture? Culture is the again social action of a specific group of a particular region or religion or cultural setting. The second root image of, according to Bloomer, is the nature of social interaction. Human social interaction takes place within groups that can either be small or large in character. So, interaction cannot take place with only one individual. It has to be more than individual, and therefore, it could be a small group, say 3 to 4, or it could be a large group in terms of n number of individual. So, all our life consists of group, and groups consist of individual life. It's kind of the two sides of the same coin. The concept of social interaction is neglected in social sciences according to Bloomer. Both treat interaction as a medium that determines behavior. So, rather than giving the focus on social interaction or action, it is kind of considered as only a side or deviant or additional, and therefore, social interactionist perspective, the social action becomes or social interaction becomes the most vital concept. For social interactionism, social interaction is a process that forms human conduct instead of being merely a means or setting for expression of human conduct. A human society consists of people in association which exist necessarily in the form of people acting towards each other and thus engaging in social interaction. The interaction in which humans participate are predominantly on symbolic level as acting individual. The third root image according to Bloomer is nature of object. Now, the world that exists for human beings and their groups are composed of objects which are the product of symbolic interactionism. According to Bloomer, an object can be defined as anything that can be indicated, referred or pointed. So, it could be a book, a stone, a relation, or any kind of anything which is kind of enabling interaction between one or two individuals. Now, Bloomer distinguishes three classes of object. Physical object, so a book could be a physical object, a social object, so a social relation could be a kin relation, could be a social relation, and abstract objects that we cannot kind of explain through certain meanings, but it helps us in the process of interaction. The environment in which a person conducts a life can consist only of the objects that have acquired meaning for us. So, the number of objects is infinite, but we are able to identify only with those objects which has a meaning for us. So, this objects then becomes important in our everyday interaction. On the other hand, the nature of the environment is comprised of the content of those meanings. So, two persons living in largely similar physical environment may have subjectively different actual environment. And why is this environment different? Because the objects are different or the means through which interaction takes place are different. The fourth component of the root image according to Bloomer is human being as an actor. So, since human being is an acting organism, therefore, person must be constituted such that they can interact with others both on non-symbolic level and in the sense of making indications as to their intended actions and interpreting the indications they perceive as making the action. So, basically, Bloomer was trying to say that human beings are actors. They are also kind of not always behaving in a predetermined way, but depending on the situation, depending on the way in which the other individual in the process of interaction is behaving or sending us stimuli, the individual will react accordingly. So, it could be symbolic as well as it could be non-symbolic. Bloomer emphasized that to do this, the individual must possess a self. And what is a self? It is a recognizable object of one's own action. So you have to be aware of yourself. You have to be aware of the meaning that you're attaching to the object. And just as in the case with other object, it must be noted, the self object also emerges from the process of social interaction. So what we are, who we are, what kind of personality we build on is entirely dependent on the kind of interaction, the way we've interacted with the different kind of people that we have interacted from birth to say particular point of time. So the nature of human action follows, which is the fifth root image according to Bloomer, from the ability to make indications to the self. This facility allows the human being to engage with the world as one who interprets it and forms decision upon which to act from that interpretation, rather than simply responding automatically to the environment based on instinctually given rules inherent in organism makeup. So, like the whole idea that if you kind of create a robot, you feed in certain instruction and the robot will follow those instructions. Human beings are not machines. They have a conscious mind. So, some of the behavior are learned and it is instinctive. So say in a particular culture, if you see someone elder, it is instinctive to show respect. But then it could be that the individual experience for the person in front was negative or was critical. So the showing respect may not then come automatically. So the nature of human action will depend on the experience, on the meaning that they are attaching, and also in terms of the kind of symbolic meaning that individual has developed. So according to Bloomer, individual has to cope with the situation in which he is called on to act, asserting the meaning of the action of others and mapping out his own line of action in the light of his interpretation. So when we are in action or interaction with someone, we are always kind of thinking about it, how we are going to behave, what we are going to say, and that to a large extent depends on the way in which the other person is interacting. The next root image according to Bloomer is interlinkages of human action. That is, this human action that we are taking part are not excluded or they are not exclusive. They are all linked to each other. And these are the building blocks of human group life. It is the process of corresponding these lines of individual action to those of others that best characterize human society. The ability to do this allows for a joint action, which are consciously entered into and which can then be referred to without the necessity of segregating out the various individual actions that make them up or identifying the individual who perform them. So after discussing the root images or the key concept used by Bloomer, let us understand George Herbert Mead and his contribution. So George Herbert Mead was a major figure in the history of American philosophy and one of the founders of pragmatism. He published numerous papers during his lifetime. Following his death, several of his students produced 4 books in his name from Mead's unpublished and even unfinished notes and manuscript. His theory of the emergence of mind and self out of the social process of significant communication has become the foundation of the symbolic interactionist perspective. So in his book, Mind, Self and Society, published in 1934, which is the key book for understanding the theory of symbolic interactionism, Herbert Mead describes how the individual mind and self arises out of the social process. Instead of approaching human experience in terms of individual psychology, Mead analysis focused on the experience from the standpoint of communication as essential to the social order. So, language, mind, thought are important for understanding the emergence of self and society. Mead sought to explain individual behavior and consciousness out of social process. So, even the mind, the self, is not a priori existence. It is constructed, and it is constructed. It is subject to change and transformation through the process of interaction. This social process is seen to be structured in pattern of mutually related and symbolic action. So, one of the key concepts of Herbert Mead was communication and mind. So, mind, according to Mead, arises within the social process of communication and cannot be understood apart from that process. So, mind is not necessarily, a biological part of the body. It's something which is a construct. What kind of a mind you have will depend on the way in which you have interacted or the part of social process that you have been subject to. The communicational process involves two phases. Number one, the conversion of conversation of gesture, and two, language or the conversation of significant gesture. Both phases, that is conversion of gesture and conversation of significant gesture, presupposes a social context within which two or more individuals are in interaction with one another. Mead introduces the idea of conversation of gesture with his famous example of the dog fight. So, when we see two dogs fighting with each other, we see that the first dog would observe the second one, and depending on whether the second is howling or making an attempt to attack, the first one will reform or will act accordingly. So, the action of the first is a stimuli to the response of the second, and that is communication of ideas. But this is only a conversation of gesture. When we attach meaning to these communication, then it becomes significant gesture. Mead's theory of communication is evolutionary. Communication develops from more or less primitive towards a more or less advanced form of social interaction. So, you know that how people interacted in primitive society would be kind of less structured, less organized compared to how we are doing. So, interaction is also evolving, it is also transforming. In the human world, language supersedes, but so the whole idea that what is the difference between the communication in animal world and the human world, it is the presence of significant gesture. And what is significant gesture? That we are able to use language to ascribe meaning to our social behavior. Language, in Mead's view, is communication through significant symbols. Symbols that we have a meaning and which we can kind of accordingly use in our everyday communication. The most important concept of Herbert Mead is the self, I and me. A person carried two instances of the self, that is the I and me. The me part, according to him, was learned behavior, a social self developed by observing the attitude of generalized other. Now, this generalized other is the society, who is teaching the individual to behave in certain accepted norms and values. The I part was the response to the me and develops according to individual impulse. So, one is developing according to the set norms, the other is developing impulsively. When toned down, it looks like this. Me is what I have learned from society or social group. and stands for all that I'm expected to do. So it is your accepted behavior, how you are supposed to behave in a society. I is who I am and all that I know for myself, and many a time the I remains hidden or remains kind of subsided, and it is the me. So in a social interaction, it depends. If the interaction is taking place at an individual level, the I might be dominating. But in a group behavior, group interaction, it is the me which generally dominates. The thinking process is an internal dialogue between the I and the me. So our thought system is actually a conflict between the me and the I, and which should dominate. According to Mead, I is the one who knows how something is feeling or someone is going to feel. Me is the feeling itself. I know I am hurt when I am cheated. That is me or my social self. Get hurt because I have learned from society that when cheated, one must feel hurt. Thus, I is the self as subject, me is the self as object. The self, like the mind, is a social emergent. This social conception of the self, Mead argues, entails that individual selves are the product of social interaction and not the logical or biological precondition of that interaction. So it is kind of again going back to the whole idea that how we are or what we are is not kind of dependent only on a biogenetic substance. To a large extent, it depends on how we are assigning meaning to our own action and learning from the action of others. The self is something which has a development. It is not initially there. So the self is something that we are going to emerge from the interaction. So it cannot be present right from the birth. It will arise once the child learns to interact, and therefore it could be at a very small age or it could be at a grown-up age that the interaction leads to the emergence of the self. The self is a reflective process. That is, it is an object to itself. For Mead, it is the reflexibility of the self that distinguishes it from other objects and from the body. So the emergence of the self in Mead's account of social emergence of the self is developed further through an elucidation of three forms of intersubjective activity, and these activities are language, play, and the game. Language plays a central role in this development. Through language, the child can take the role of other person and guide his behavior in terms of the effect of his contemplated behavior will have upon other. Language and communication shape personality. Two personality types that result from language and communications are me, the conformist, because me is the accepted behavior. So your personality that you accept what the society tells you to do, you are a conformist. The second type of personality is I, the savage self, where you are doing what your intuition or what your mind tells you to do. Maybe it is going against the accepted norms of the society. So the two stages of the development of self are play stage, learn by imitation of particular others. Children can think in abstraction, so they learn to take roles of others by imitation. The game of house, one child imitates the mother, the other imitates the father. So through this play stage, they are learning the norms of the family. Game stage gains the ability to think in abstract, places themselves in roles and arrives at what is expected of them. Ability to think about expected roles and behaviors based on the perceptions of the generalized other. So through this understanding of the contribution of Herbert Blumer and George Herbert Mead, we have understood the interactionist perspective and the core concept used. With this, I've come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.